When a police officer pointed her gun at an off-duty Army veteran, the crowd's reaction transformed everything. The soft murmur of conversation and rhythmic beeping of checkout scanners filled the air inside a bustling supermarket in Sacramento, California. It was a typical Tuesday evening, with customers leisurely moving through aisles, picking up fresh produce and frozen dinners. Among them stood Nathaniel Davis, a 48-year-old retired senior Army officer now working in logistics. Off-duty, dressed in a simple navy sweatshirt and jeans, Nathaniel blended seamlessly into the crowd that night. He pushed a small cart through the dairy section, scanning for almond milk. His uniform from earlier lay neatly folded at home. As he reached for the milk, something felt off. A pair of eyes lingered on him. Turning slightly, he caught sight of a white police officer standing at the edge of the aisle. Her crisp uniform contrasted sharply against the casual attire of shoppers around her. She wasn't shopping, she was watching. At first, Nathaniel dismissed it. Years in the military had taught him not to jump to conclusions. He gave a polite nod, but her expression remained tense, unbroken. Something about the intensity in her gaze sent an unspoken message: this wasn't idle curiosity. Continuing his shopping, he moved toward the canned goods aisle, yet the feeling didn't fade. Each time he glanced over his shoulder, there she was, standing just a little too close, her hand resting near her holstered weapon. Unease crept in, though he tried to push it aside. She's probably just being vigilant, he thought. But as he turned into the frozen food section, the weight of her stare refused to lift. It became undeniable now, this wasn't his imagination. She was following him. Nathaniel adjusted his grip on the cart, determined to ignore the brewing tension. Little did he know, this silent dance of suspicion was only beginning. Pausing near the produce section, he carefully selected a bundle of spinach. Cooking healthy meals was a habit carried over from his military days. As he turned to place the spinach in his cart, her voice caught through the hum of activity behind him, sharp, commanding. "Excuse me, sir. I need to speak with you." Nathaniel turned to face her, keeping his expression calm. Years of leading troops under pressure had honed his ability to remain composed in tense situations. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, his tone even. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing as they scanned him head to toe. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. I need to know what you're doing here." Nathaniel blinked, momentarily stunned by the accusation. "I'm grocery shopping, just like everyone else," he replied, gesturing to his half-full cart. Her gaze flicked briefly to the cart before returning to him. "I'm going to need to see some identification." "Identification? For buying spinach and almond milk?" Nathaniel let out a soft, incredulous laugh, shaking his head. "With all due respect, officer, I haven't done anything wrong. Is there a specific reason you're asking me for ID?" Her jaw tightened, and she placed a hand on her holster, a silent but clear escalation. "Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Show me your ID." The air between them thickened, and Nathaniel could feel the stares of other shoppers boring into him. Taking a deep breath, he chose his words carefully. "Look, I don't know what you think I've done, but I'm not required to show ID just because I'm walking through a store. If there's a specific accusation, let's address it. Otherwise, I'd like to finish my shopping." The officer's face reddened, her tone growing more aggressive. "I saw you acting suspiciously, walking up and down the aisles like you're casing the place. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Nathaniel was no stranger to baseless accusations, he'd faced them before, even in uniform. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield or a military base. This was a supermarket, a place where he should have been just another customer. Yet here he was, singled out and cornered. Before he could respond, the officer's voice grew louder, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers. "If you're refusing to cooperate, I'll have no choice but to take further action." Nathaniel's heart began to race, not out of fear for himself, but for how quickly the situation was escalating. Raising his hand slightly, a gesture of caution, he said, "I'm cooperating, officer. I'm just asking for a little respect." But respect wasn't on the menu tonight. And the officer's next move would shatter the fragile calm of the store. Her voice rang out, cutting through the murmurs of the supermarket, louder now, commanding attention. "Hands where I can see them, now!" Her hand gripped the handle of her gun, and the atmosphere shifted in an instant. The calm routine of shopping dissolved into stunned silence as customers froze in place, their gazes darting between Nathaniel and the officer. Nathaniel felt his pulse quicken. He'd trained for moments of high tension, but this wasn't a battlefield. This was a supermarket aisle, with innocent people looking on, including children clutching their parents' hands. Keeping his hands raised, he spoke with measured calm. "Officer, there's no need for this. I've done nothing wrong." But her eyes burned with suspicion, her voice unwavering. "Get down on the ground, now." Nathaniel hesitated. Lying on the dirty supermarket floor felt like a step too far, a humiliation too great. But the growing crowd around him, their phones now raised and recording, made the stakes crystal clear. Any wrong move could turn catastrophic. Slowly, he crouched, lowering himself to his knees. "Stay down," she barked, her gun now fully drawn and pointed directly at him. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A mother shielded her child's eyes, while an older man muttered angrily, "What is she doing? He hasn't done anything." From his position on the floor, Nathaniel looked up, his voice steady but firm. "Officer, I am a retired senior Army officer. I have served this country for over 20 years. This, whatever this is, it's not right." Her lips tightened, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face, but she quickly doubled down. "Don't move. You don't get to decide what's right or wrong here." The crowd began murmuring louder, emboldened by Nathaniel's calm defiance. A man stepped forward, phone in hand. "Lady, you're out of line. He hasn't done anything. Put the gun away." The officer glared at him. "Step back. This doesn't concern you." But the crowd wasn't stepping back. More voices joined in, demanding she explain herself. "What's he done? Why are you pulling a gun on him?" another woman shouted. Nathaniel glanced at the crowd, grateful for their support, but his focus remained on the officer. He knew this moment could go either way. Keeping his voice level, speaking as though the two of them were alone, he said, "You're making a mistake. Please take a step back and think this through." But the officer wasn't listening. The situation had spiraled beyond her control, and the next moments would determine how it all ended. As the tension in the store hit its peak, a loud voice cut through the chaos. "What's going on here?" The store manager, a middle-aged man with a name tag reading Greg, rushed into the scene, followed closely by a security guard. The young guard, Trevor, looked stunned as he took in the sight, the drawn gun, Nathaniel on the floor, and the crowd with their phones raised. Greg stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "Officer, this is a grocery store, not a crime scene. What exactly are you accusing this man of?" The officer didn't lower her gun. "Suspicious behavior. I have reason to believe he's shoplifting and potentially armed." Trevor exchanged a glance with Greg before speaking up. "Ma'am, I've been monitoring the security cameras. This gentleman hasn't done anything suspicious. He's just been shopping." The officer's face hardened. "Are you sure about that?" "Absolutely," Trevor replied, his voice unwavering. "I can pull up the footage right now if you'd like." Nathaniel, still kneeling, kept his hands up but couldn't suppress a small sigh of relief. "You see, officer, there's no reason for this." The crowd murmured in agreement, their voices growing louder. "Let him up," one man yelled. "You're way out of line," shouted another. Greg stepped closer, his tone firm but calm. "Officer, I think it's time to de-escalate. This isn't what you think it is." The officer's grip on her gun faltered, but she didn't holster it. Her eyes darted around, taking in the crowd, the cameras, and the growing realization that she was losing control of the narrative. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she took a step back and lowered the weapon. "You're free to go," she said, her voice curt. Nathaniel rose slowly, dusting off his jeans. His voice was steady, but it carried the weight of his frustration. "Free to go? I've been humiliated in front of all these people, treated like a criminal, and for what? Because I'm shopping while black?" Her face flushed, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked toward the exit, ignoring the crowd's murmurs and phone still recording her every move. Trevor approached Nathaniel, his expression apologetic. "Sir, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. If there's anything we can do," Nathaniel held up a hand, offering a tight but understanding smile. "It's not your fault. But this can't keep happening." As Nathaniel left the store, the videos captured that night began making their way online, igniting a firestorm that would demand accountability and spark a national conversation. By the time Nathaniel returned home, his phone was buzzing nonstop. Friends, family, and even former colleagues were reaching out, sending him links to videos that had already gone viral. The footage of the officer drawing her gun on him in the middle of the supermarket had spread like wildfire, shared across social media with captions like "racial profiling at its worst" and "black veteran humiliated for grocery shopping." News outlets picked up the story within hours. Local stations in Sacramento were the first to run it, but soon national networks joined in. Hashtags like #JusticeForNathaniel and #racial profiling began trending, with people from all walks of life expressing their outrage. Veterans groups released statements condemning the officer's actions, and civil rights organizations called for a thorough investigation. Nathaniel's phone rang again. It was a reporter from a major news outlet requesting an interview. But Nathaniel wasn't ready to speak publicly just yet. He needed time to process the whirlwind of emotions: anger, humiliation, sadness, disbelief, all churned inside him. But there was also a deep sense of resolve. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had been unfairly targeted and silenced. Meanwhile, the police department faced mounting pressure. The officer involved was identified as Patricia Hayes, a 6-year veteran of the force. Public records began to surface, revealing previous complaints of excessive force and discriminatory behavior. The department quickly announced that Officer Hayes had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. But the public wasn't satisfied with that. Protests began forming outside the police station, with demonstrators holding signs that read "Enough is enough" and "Accountability now." The videos continued to circulate, gaining millions of views and sparking heated debates about racial bias in law enforcement. For days after the incident, the department held a press conference. The police chief addressed the crowd, visibly uneasy under the scrutiny. "We take these allegations very seriously," he said, reading from a prepared statement. "Officer Hayes' actions are not reflective of the values of this department. Effective immediately, she has been terminated from her position." The announcement was met with mixed reactions. For some, it was a step in the right direction, but for others, it was far from enough. "Firing one officer doesn't fix a broken system," one protester said during an on-camera interview. As for Nathaniel, he finally decided to speak publicly, appearing on a major news program. He shared his story with grace and dignity. "This isn't about me," he told the host. "This is about making sure no one else has to go through what I went through. It's about holding people accountable and building a future where everyone is treated with respect, no matter who they are or where they come from." The firestorm had forced a reckoning, but for Nathaniel, it was only the beginning of a larger fight for justice and equality. In the weeks that followed, the incident remained a hot topic in national conversations. News panels debated the implications of racial profiling, and social media buzzed with calls for systemic change. Activists used the footage to highlight ongoing issues of bias in law enforcement, and communities across the country rallied around the need for reforms. Nathaniel found himself thrust into a role he hadn't expected, that of a public advocate. Invitations to speak at events and join discussions poured in. While he had never sought the spotlight, he understood the importance of using his voice. He began working with local organizations to address the deeper issues that led to moments like the one he experienced in the supermarket. His story became a powerful reminder that change doesn't come from silence, it comes from holding systems accountable, confronting uncomfortable truths, and standing together against injustice. For Nathaniel, the moment in the supermarket wasn't just a painful memory. It was a catalyst for action. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, he stood before a crowd of hundreds gathered at a community rally. Families, veterans, activists, and everyday people filled the park, holding signs and cheering as he approached the microphone. "Let me be clear," he began, his voice steady and strong. "What happened to me is not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of something much bigger. But together, we can change this. We can build a world where no one has to fear being targeted because of how they look or where they come from." The crowd erupted into applause, but Nathaniel's expression remained solemn. "This isn't just about calling out bad actors. It's about fixing broken systems. It's about teaching respect and understanding. It's about building a future where our children don't have to live in fear." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. "So what can you do? Speak out when you see injustice. Support organizations fighting for equality. And most importantly, treat each other with the dignity we all deserve." As the rally ended, Nathaniel walked away feeling lighter, knowing that the pain he endured had sparked something meaningful. He knew the road ahead would be long, but he was ready to keep fighting, not just for himself, but for the countless others who couldn't. The incident in the supermarket became more than just a viral video. It became a rallying cry for justice and change. And for Nathaniel, it was a reminder that even in the face of humiliation and bias, the fight for what's right is always worth it.